This is a recording of my conversation with Andrew Ettinger, Chief Revenue Officer at BigID. BigID helps companies discover their critical data, ensure its security and privacy, and ultimately extract value. We discuss about risks and opportunities in enterprise data and how companies can navigate the data complexity. We end with some thoughts on the future of managing data. I'm talking to Andrew Ettinger, Chief Revenue Officer at BigID. BigID uses machine learning to help companies better protect critical data, such as customer or employee data. BigID is a fairly new company, being founded only in 2016, but so far it had tremendous success, both in terms of funding and growth. Andrew, please introduce yourself, the company, and your role.
Hey, Chip, thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. I think you did a fantastic job introducing, but I'm Andrew Ettinger. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at BigID. We're, extremely lucky to be in a space where we fundamentally help companies get a better level of intelligence around what we call their crown jewel data. And so we've developed a data intelligence platform that enables people to understand at a real deep level all of the information across all of their systems and structured and unstructured and data in motion around PI, personally identifiable information, and PII information, and bring in the right context, the right cataloging, the right correlation between all of that data so that a myriad of use cases can be applied on top, primarily around privacy, security, and data access and governance. And so we're really excited to be in a field where folks are trying to get more value out of their data. And we believe we've got a really innovative way to helping people across those vast opportunities.
Great. Let's start with some fundamentals. Data is a critical resource, not fully explored by many companies, but also a potential source of risk, either regulatory or breaching. What do you see as the opportunity and risk in data?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Chip. I mean, obviously on the opportunity side, people increasingly want to leverage data to fuel their business going forward. There's more data available to us than ever before, and the winners and losers in the next 10 years will be the ones that, A, have a modern approach to leveraging that data, and then B, get that into production in some sort of software asset that allows them to interact in new and modern ways with their customers, their partners, and their trading opportunities. Now, you got to take a step back and say, how do I get there, right? And the risk associated with that is A, not using the right data sets, B, not understanding the sensitivity in the data that you can or you can't use, but really just starting with understanding what you have and what you don't have. And so a lot of companies are trying to deal with that, and they're taking a myriad of approaches to getting there, and a lot of them are really sound and fundamental. The biggest mistake, and to your point on the risk that people are making, is trying to go fast without thinking about some of the foundational elements that have to be in place. Many people look at that as saying, hey, wait, I don't want to slow this down and get this perfect governance, platform in place because then I'll never get to those business opportunities. And that actually isn't true. And so if you actually just start and think about all of the opportunities that you have and be pragmatic about that approach, it will actually enable you to go faster so that you don't use data that you shouldn't be using. You understand where there might be bias that's implied to the data that goes into the machine learning algorithm. You understand how you would comply with all of the regulations that are in place for states or countries or other areas of that nature. And so it really just takes a pragmatic approach and starts very fundamentally with just understanding where your crown jewel data is, how it's correlated to each other, and how do you have a very robust set of metadata in a catalog that describes what that data is so that you can then take that applied use and drive it across the business opportunities, and also make sure that it's secure and that you are privacy aware from the beginning. And so we think those are the opportunities.
So in this context, what specific problem does the BigID try to solve and how?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Chip. I mean, very fundamentally, like I said, there's one question that if you ask an executive inside of, any company, but let's take the Global 2000 for a second. And it's very fundamentally like, do you understand where all of your data is specifically related to, your crown jewel data? And that increasingly is a hard thing to say yes to. And it's not because IT systems have been architected the wrong way. And it's not because the processes haven't been great. It's just the amount of data that's being created, whether it's at the edge, whether it's with systems, whether it's stored in Salesforce or Google Drive or Box or, mobile data. It's just really hard to bring all that together. And so fundamentally, we are here to help companies understand where that data is, understand the relationship between all of that data, and provide a platform by which they can then draw those inferences and create economic value from that data at the same time that you're making sure that it's secure and that you're only doing it with the right set of data that is allowed to be integrated into your business and maintain those privacy controls at all times. And so, very fundamentally, it all starts with discovering that data. And, companies have really embraced that approach as these modern techniques to find, classify, and discover all that data.
So for whom would this beneficial? There are companies obviously located in multiple geographies, subject to multiple regulations, different languages that they store their data in. How does BigID navigate this complexity?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Chip. I mean, on one hand, it kind of relates to anyone, right? Because if you're doing business and have data on customers, you need to make sure that you understand where that data is and you're complying with the rules if you're doing business in the state of California, if you're doing business in Brazil, if you're doing business in London, et cetera, et cetera. So, at the highest level, it's anyone. However, if you then drill down into the business opportunity for BigID and match that up against, right, the ideal, kind of customer profile, you'd be looking at the Global 2000 that have the greatest degree of complexity, to your point, where they have multiple global offices and locations. They are going to have multiple areas of data stored in multiple cloud platforms. You've got data sovereignty issues, right? You've got multiple lines of business, and with that becomes an explosion of databases and file shares and messaging and other ways in which data is leveraged. And for us, that complexity is where we thrive, because that's where we were built from the ground up to help companies. And on the inverse of that, that is where companies are challenged the most because of that complexity. And so we sit in the middle of that and try to provide an easier way for all that to be managed. And so for us, it's focusing really on that Global 2000, but, largely anyone has opportunities in which you can leverage this data and comply with, security or privacy regulations, for example.
So what do companies need in order to implement? How they start with BigID?
First, they just need data. So that's the easiest thing. The way in which we fundamentally start with companies is to identify what we call the minimum valuable impact, right, or the MVI. So what is the smallest amount of data and systems that we could start to show connectivity to prove out that there would be value to then move forward with. So we call that sort of the MVI. And that doesn't mean that we aren't working with customers to scan their entire legacy estate and 10,000 plus data systems. But to get started, you wouldn't want to start with that. So we look for what that impact would be based on, the company's profile. So for example, it might be, I have an instance of Salesforce. I have, some data in some relational databases. I have some, unstructured data stored in my data lake. And I would like to understand the correlation between, invoices and purchase orders that are stored in my data lake, my customer master record information in my Oracle relational database, and then all of my structured and unstructured data in Salesforce that ties together some of the marketing campaigns that I've run to some of these customers, as well as free-form text notes, as well as obviously other structured fields in the account record there. How does that all connect? What does that look like? What are the correlations? How would you classify and cluster things, and show some real quick wins around all of that as one example that then can span into a myriad of other use cases and data systems from there. So it's really all starting with showing value and impact in, a 30 or 60-day time period that we can then collectively build, dozens and dozens of use cases and a multi-year roadmap together off of.
What is unique about the BigID technology behind all this?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Chip. I mean, for us, we started with the hardest problem first, and that was going bottoms up, going really deep into all of these systems. And when I say going deep, I mean, this is down into the data object level, right? I mean, for example, you might have tables and databases with no metadata that actually explain to you what's in that table. You might have, a set of numbers that might look like a social security number, it might look like a purchase order, it might look like a ship to location. It might look like a manufacturing facility, but they're all in one table and they're all 9 digits, for example, right? And so, our unique technology is the ability to access all of those systems, regardless of structured, unstructured, data in motion, data at rest, et cetera, and then apply the context through our machine learning algorithms that then classifies and categorizes all of that information and creates effectively an automated business glossary of what all of that data is and what it means. And that's been a really hard problem for people, even for the ones that have done this manually or had some degree of automation to set this up. We've really been able to accelerate the pace of innovation around that and give them a starting point that moves the high watermark up for the ones that had started. And for the ones that hadn't started, it drastically accelerates their time to value to understand what they have so they can then apply that to advanced and higher and better uses within the organization.
What are the benefits that the customers could expect? Do you have any success stories that you could share?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, once you understand that data, there are a myriad of benefits that you can achieve. And the thing for me that's the most fun is the unintended consequences of what happens and the value that customers get. I mean, I think, there are, as we talked about earlier, just very simple things about being able to comply with regulations and avoid being penalized by, the authorities that govern, right, data sovereignty, data privacy. Right. You obviously on the security side have, the ability to ensure that all that data is secured. So, you have things in there that can be tangible or non-tangible depending on how you look at it. But once you have all this data, folks have then seen like, hey, you know what? I'm actually storing 20% of my data in the same database in a different location twice. So my storage costs, are dramatically higher. I'm looking to migrate to the cloud, right? What data do I have that's duplicate that I shouldn't be going to move twice, right? Now that I understand all this data, how can I now create machine learning algorithms that go into an AI system that better target Chip or Andrew? And so on that side, on sort of the business opportunity side, we've seen people decrease their storage costs by 15 to 20%. We've seen people increase the accuracy of their models and their propensity for customers to interact with them by upwards of 30 or 40%. Because they weren't using the right data sets and they didn't have the right correlation. And then obviously on the governance, security, and privacy side, it's a little bit harder to necessarily quantify, but those are things that are sort of just good hygiene and blocking and talking that you have to do, but you can't do it unless you can find all your data.
How can BigID help now move from data discovery for privacy or protection purposes to now data intelligence and extracting insight from your data?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Chip. And again, I think it starts with that foundation. And what we've done is say, hey, look, once you've found all of that data, you've classified it, you've correlated it, you've run the cluster analysis. How do you now then put that into action? And so we developed an SDK that allows anyone to build applications to drive business value and impact against that data. So we started building out about 12 or 15 different applications around security, privacy, and data governance, intelligence, access rights, et cetera. And over time, our vision is to have this be a marketplace very similar to the iPhone and the App Store, where customers can build their own applications on top of that data to be able to then drive insight, action, and the applied use of this inside of the company.
For the last question, I would like to go broader again. So based on what you see in your interactions with the best companies, clients or potential clients, what do you think is the future of managing data?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Chip. I think for starters, people are looking to drive as much automation as they can into the process, both on the discovery side, on how you deal with data in motion, and how you leverage the data connecting from a myriad of sources. I think open source plays a vital role in the new analytics stack that people are looking at to now drive that insight and action. And then obviously, being cloud first and having a cloud native architecture to be able to respond to, the change that's happening in this world. If you don't have the right architecture, it's going to be impossible to respond to these changes. And one thing, is for certain in the data landscape, change is always going to be upon us. And so the ones that, have the right cloud native architecture in place to be able to nimbly react to those are the ones that are ultimately going to win. So for us, it really comes down to that architecture and having that right process in place that supports an agile approach to being able to constantly leverage new data sources, new insights, and new opportunities that arise in everyday business.
This was a great summary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chip. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.